Thank you. So the title of my remarks today will be The Power of Leadership and Leveraging Leadership for Social Justice. So I've had the distinct honor over the past year to travel across the world, from Tanzania to China, and nationally from California to Arizona and back to the Midwest, to ask one simple question: what is in your hands to make a difference in the world? And when I've asked this question, one of the things that I realized very early on is that we miss asking this question as it relates to legal education and the power of lawyers to make an impact. So when I think about this, by missing this question, we miss an opportunity to connect our natural skills, gifts and talents, and our training in order to make an impact, to leave the world a better place than how we found it. So in particular for me, this type of advocacy is about making a dream come true. In my introduction, you received the idea of kind of who I am, but first and primarily, I'm an educator. So as an educator, I had the opportunity to share my vision on what this thing called leadership for social justice would really look like in the law school curriculum. It would focus specifically on leadership development, and when I talk about leadership development, I think oftentimes we get lost in kind of the myths related to leadership, that it's about position, it's about title, it's about power. But truly for me, leadership is about influence. How can you make a difference? And then social justice, really that essence of fairness, that essence of equity. And actually the definition, if you look at it, either in Black's Law Dictionary or dictionary.com, whichever you prefer, the sense of justice about a moral right, about truth, about creating a better world. So in combining the two, leadership and social justice, for me it's actually a dream come true. Because I always wanted to become Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire. So I don't know if you can see me now, but I wanted to be Wonder Woman with a law degree and an afro. All right? And I came close this morning with the rain. I was inching towards it. But I knew that lawyers could have a powerful impact to be able to make a difference. And in particular, why I'm excited to be here today is to be among students. Because history has shown us that students have been at the forefront of social change movements. Whether it's the students of the past, do we know them as our freedom riders who fought against racial segregation? Or even of our present and of the future, look at the students who are advocating for Black Lives Matter. Or the students through the Dream Defenders who are advocating against stand your ground laws. Why students? Because you are the future. Why now? Because the world is waiting for you, our local communities, our global communities. And why do I say that? Because young people have always been able to breathe life into law and policy and into our essence of justice. Why? Because you've moved us closer to the moral higher ground of justice, freedom, and liberty. But I want to tell you about one young person as she emerged, and hopefully I still can earn the title of young, is myself and my journey. Because I always, when I meet a speaker, I want to know their story. So I'll call it the Chronicles of Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire. How about that? We'll have my first comic book series launch right here. And so let me tell you a little bit about my story. My story was something like this, that over time injustice had become my reality. I lived in a community that all of a sudden we had this new two words that I had never heard of emerge: mass incarceration. With America having 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population, nearly 2 million people incarcerated. And when I talk about mass incarceration, I had to make it real for myself, that it was a tangled web with far too many entry points and far fewer exit points. And when I look at my own community, it was alive and well, this tangled web, because I realized one of those things that Dr. Cornel West talked about, that race does matter. Race matters when there are more African American males incarcerated today than who were enslaved during the 1800s. So what does this look like for me? The reality was the war on drugs hit home. Our moms and our dads, our sisters and our brothers, our aunts and uncles entered into those prison gates, and they were locked up and locked out for nonviolent drug offenses. And when I say locked out, because they came back home. And sometime in criminal justice reform, we never talk about that most people are coming back home. And when they came back home, they came back to far fewer opportunities than when they began. Why? Because they had restricted access to jobs, housing, and even voting. And I know I teased Ray a little bit earlier. I told him I have the best crime prevention plan in the state of Minnesota. It starts with my own family and my own community to help to create jobs and offer access to housing and to advocate for voting rights. This is my daily work. So all of a sudden I realized that our communities were broken. But Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire, I didn't start with wanting to become an attorney. I wanted to become a teacher. So we had generations of educators in my community. So I knew that there was power in education. And I also believed in the words of Malcolm X, that education is the passport to the future. That was my reality. But when I entered into that kindergarten classroom for my student teaching opportunity, I realized that for far too many children, that passport's permanently revoked. And I remember looking at, the many young people who struggle to do basic things like reading or arithmetic. And it was an easy answer for many teachers. They would say it's their fault. They don't understand. They didn't work hard enough. They didn't come from the right side of the tracks, whatever the excuse was. But truly it was through no fault of their own. I call that an adult problem. I call that a social problem. I call that an investment problem. When we can choose not to invest in things like early childhood education. In my state and other states across the nation, we spend between 2 and 4 times more on prisons than we do on education. So if those children were struggling, it was through no fault of their own. Because programs like Head Start, 96% of eligible children never have a chance to participate. Why? A values and adult problem. We don't provide funding. So our children were broken. So I was at this crossroads between the intersection of the highway of race and poverty. And I had a choice to make. It's like our policies are broken. I had a choice to make. What would I do? Sit on the sidelines and even read the headlines, no matter where I traveled to. In the past year, I've traveled to about 48 states to give this message of leadership for social justice. The headlines don't change. It's that triple threat that Dr. King talked about: racism, poverty, and war. I can read the headlines no matter where I am in the world and anticipate what they are, and I don't need to be a prophet. And when I looked at it, I had to make a choice. I could say it's too bad, it's too sad, how unfortunate the social justice issues of our time, or I could take a stand. And I decided, like you, I decided to go to law school because I recognized that the law was a language of power, so I needed to become well-versed in that language to help shape the destiny of my community. So you know what time it was. Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire, I was ready to go. But I was flying solo. I only could fly so far. I was missing a link. No good superhero works alone. I needed a team. And I found my team in a civil rights clinic that I helped to create called the Community Justice Project at the University of St. Thomas School of Law. And all of a sudden, what were we doing there together as a team? My students even one year called themselves the Justice League. So I had Justice League East and West. I'm like, this is perfect. We're right on time here. Aquaman, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, we were set. But what were we on a mission to do? We were on a mission to make an impact. So when I think about this specifically, my students believed in the words of Charles Hamilton Houston, that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. They said, ouch. Let us not end up in that latter category. Even as second-year law students, they said, we can do something. We can grab our pen and paper, like Ida B. Wells, write for justice. We can lift our voices like Dr. King and make an impact. We can shape policies like Marian Wright Edelman and stand for children, because she warned, if we don't stand for children, we don't stand for much. So all of a sudden, as a team of superheroes, we weren't just focused on a handful of cases. I'm like, been there, done that in a law school clinic. So we need really get to the root of the problem to deal with these social issues and policies. So it was time for us to roll up our sleeves. So I'm going to tell you about a few of the campaigns that we worked on, because I hope it gives you the motivation of law being a tool and a language of power once again. But better yet, I'd be remiss. I'm here in Houston Hall. Let me give you a little more about Charles Hamilton Houston. The other thing that he said is that a lawyer is a sentinel. What in the world is that? Against what's wrong. It means that we have to stand guard, stand watch. And if I think about the words of Dr. King, a challenge for you, he said the most tragic thing that we can do is sleep during a revolution. Are you asleep, my friend? Or are you awoke and ready to do some work? So my students decided, they said, let's wake up, wake up, wake up. No longer hit snooze, let's do something. So the first campaign that we worked on, we fought against the high cost of prison phone calls. And when I talk about the issues that I worked on, they were up close and personal. As I remember pre-caller ID, my mom would say, put that phone down gently when you hear collect call from Minnesota State Correctional Facility. It was real because my mom had to choose between accepting that collect prison phone call or paying the basic bills of our housing and our food. So the choices were there. So when they gave me an opportunity to work on that campaign, I said, I remember that feeling. So I'm going to make sure that prison phone calls are fair, reasonable, and just. So we worked on it. Here's one tip. The cause of justice. It doesn't usually happen overnight. I thought I'd write a few letters and it would be done. Nearly 4 years later, we were still advocating before the FCC to place a cap on prison phone calls. We just had our most recent victory this past fall. So, but don't clap for me. Clap for the millions of people, the prisoners, the grandmother, Martha Wright, who took a stand related to prison phone calls, and the families who got involved and advocated and sent a floodgate of letters into the FCC. The other issue that we were working on for a number of years as well, still yet in the state of Minnesota and a challenge of states all across the nation, restore the vote. We fought for voting rights to be restored to felons. Minnesota has this dirty little secret. We'll say, oh, we have the lowest rates of incarceration. We didn't always have some of these low rates. But the dirty little secret is most people are on probation or parole. So if I say it in the vernacular, when I went to the barber shops and talked to people at the beauty salons, at the churches, they would say, our people are on paper. That's why we can't vote. So I said, okay, what do we do about this? We fight. We say that that's a current civil rights issue. And the irony of it was, as I marched in Selma last year for the 50th anniversary march, states like Alabama, when you have a felony, you're not able to vote. It can be a permanent ban. We fight. So we continue to fight on restore the vote for millions of Americans who look like us across the nation who are unable to vote because they're on paper. We also fought for our babies, for our children, and they need each of us to fight for them. I was shocked and appalled. My mom brought home a report from the Children's Defense Fund, the Cradle to the Prison Pipeline campaign. You can download it, Google it, get a copy. And as I read it in the introduction, I said, how in the world can we predict that a black boy born in 2001 has a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison, a Latino boy a 1 in 6 chance? We can predict that, but we can't predict success. And we know what works. We know education works. We know health care works. We know livable wages work. But we can't invest in that. In the words of Marvin Gaye, makes me want to holler. We have to holler that there's a problem and use our voices as lawyers to do just that. So we advocated back home and nationally for a program sponsored by the Annie E. Casey Foundation called the Juvenile Detentions Alternatives Initiative to say that we would use juvenile detention as the last resort and not our first choice. We also fought against the emergence of the school-to-prison pipeline. Every year, millions of children enter into that pipeline being referred out of the classroom for school disciplinary issues, whether it's talking too loud, being disruptive, school fight. But typically, here's another dirty secret that we often don't talk about. It's usually for truancy. Get that. You're referred to the juvenile justice system for not going to school. It feels a little riddled to me. And more importantly, as lawyers, you'll learn how to ask some key questions. Back home, I started asking questions. They know me as that now. They're like, she's going to ask a question. What will it be? So I had to raise my hand. I said, I'm just making a little observation here. May I ask, how much does it typically cost to incarcerate a young person in one of these lovely facilities that we call a juvenile detention center? They're like, roughly between $360 and $400 a day. I said, imagine if we use those same funds to invest in a family and disrupt poverty. I got silenced, but I continued to ask questions. So the reality of why I give you those examples, because if you have a voice, you have power. And our legal training gives us unique tools to be those gladiators for justice. And we're commissioned to do just that. Now, if I go back, and you'll notice about law school, they like to talk about the Ancient of Days. And they'll use phrases from Aristotle and Socrates. And Aristotle said one thing that I love, that lawyers are supposed to be the very personification of justice. And if we're supposed to be that, what does that look like? For me, that looks like a call to leadership. How can you use your influence to make an impact? How can you use your voice to challenge injustice? How can you use your skills to problem solve around the social ills that are surrounding us day by day? So when I think about that, it's marching orders for each and every one of us. And oftentimes, as I've gone across, like I said, the world giving this message, people say, well, what can I do? You can't afford not to do anything. So I hope that you start with where you are. So the first tip that I will give you is find your passion. Now for me, I started my career as a family law attorney. It was just my first job, I'll be honest. They say, you're hired. I said, okay. I'll learn this code really quick. And I'll start doing dissolutions and orders for protection. You'll have the best attorney possible. I give you that as a sidebar. It wasn't where I wanted to start, but it was an opportunity where I can hone in my skills, and I still use those same advocacy, critical thinking, analytical skills today in my role as a civil rights attorney. But I'll tell you that this civil rights attorney was birthed on a South Africa Airlines flight. I was traveling to South Africa in 2007. To present my research on social justice advocacy and leadership development. And while there, I learned about this concept called Ubuntu. And it really resonated with me that a person is a person through others. And all of a sudden I said, this is what I really need to think about. And specifically, let me just read one brief quote from Archbishop Tutu. So I want to make sure I get this one right. He said that Ubuntu, it embraces hospitality, caring about others, being able to go the extra mile for the sake of others. So for me, you don't have to look too far to figure out what I go the extra mile about, criminal justice and education issues. But what are you passionate about? How will you go that extra mile? And the next piece that I would challenge you to do is to know that leadership is about service. You've heard that from both of our other esteemed panelists as well. How will you serve? And I'll quote Dr. King on this particular piece because I think it's important for us to redefine leadership and looking at service being at the core, at the forefront. And he said in his speech, The Drum Major Instinct, he said that greatness is measured through one's commitment to serve. He stated by giving that definition of greatness, it means that everyone can be great because everyone can serve. So I see greatness in this room. And last but not least, my final tip will be start serving right where you are. Find a way to get involved. Because I know too many times in my life I wasted opportunities because I said I'd serve later. I'll do something maybe next time when I have more money, more time, more resources. But my challenge for you today is as you're receiving this information, you teach one. Each one, reach one, teach one. And actually it comes from our ABA president, Paulette Brown, the first African-American female president. She's been really an inspiration for me. And one of the things that I interviewed her for an article just a few months ago. And I said, well, what can we do? Where do we start? And she said, start that basic essence of start where you are. Commit 1 hour a week to volunteering and making an impact. But she also said something very profound in her mid-year speech. She said, always remember that a law degree is more than a piece of paper. It's about power. And I must admit, where I grew up, power was kind of a word that I was like, let me avoid. Because it usually meant someone having power over me. But I think what she's giving us an essence of is power with and in collaboration together to make an impact in the world around us. So when I think about it, as I close, the challenge that I started off with of what is in your hands to make a difference in the world, really that challenge is looking at our hands in a different way and realizing no matter where we're situated in life, as long as we have that breath of life and one more chance, we can make an impact each and every day. So what is in our hands? The type of transformative power to transform the world, to make justice, freedom, liberty a lived reality. And more importantly, I'll close with my theme song for Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire. Give us some marching orders. It's actually Ella's song, inspired by the life of Ella Baker, one of our early freedom fighters who trained the young people in SNCC and throughout the civil rights movement led voting rights campaigns. The song that's sung by Sweet Honey in the Rock, and I don't have the vocal, so I'll just read the lyrics, okay? It goes a little something like this. It says, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes." So I challenge you today, my friends, grab your capes and let's soar to new levels. Welcome to the Justice League.